Hi, welcome. My name's Dan McCluskey, and on this video, it's part of my series called Flipping the Script. Going to be focusing in on a very interesting conversation between two dog trainers who identify as force-free. Picture here on the left here, John McGuigan, Glasgow dog trainer, who has Dr. Ian Dunbar on as a guest. And Dr. Ian Dunbar, a highly esteemed in the force-free dog training community. And here in this conversation, which makes this very interesting, is a moment which you're going to see, a moment that happens by way of Dr. Ian Dunbar actually admitting to a problem by way of this very popular idea with how trainers approach training as a learning-based exercise, using treats to motivate dogs to respond when a relationship problem is underway. And again, when I talk about relationship problem, understanding that that's the dot that is not connected by many in the dog training community when it comes to approaching a relationship problem by way of a learning-based exercise. Again, I talk about the source of the problem right away in terms of the two core ingredients that define a process by way of control and influence. And again, I talk about dogs as social animals, how again in terms of how they follow a path of nature, strength and weakness being defined through how they connect with us that way, and our role in terms of advocating, in terms of connecting the right way, in terms of how we interact with, which brings us into a a relationship in which both needs are met. Now here, the conversation, again, I encourage you to pay attention to the body language of John McGuigan as this conversation takes a unexpected turn, and you can tell that he's kind of taken aback by a moment of honesty, okay, that happens by way of Dr. Ian Dunbar. And so I'm going to play some of this video. I'm going to stop along the way to add some commentary to fill in some gaps as it relates to how trainers approach training as a learning-based exercise.
We up and running?
Yeah, we are.
So you want me to look at you, not at the camera?
Either or, it's fine. So Ian has graciously given me some of his time this weekend, and we're just going to have a chat about some dog training stuff. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about was we're still seeing it, although we've made massive progress in the last 30 years towards non-aversive dog training, we're still seeing people using not even so much metal collars, or we're still electric collars a little bit, but people telling their dog no, for...
So I'll stop it here right away to kind of point out the slippery slope of this ideology. And again, when I say ideology, okay, I'm talking about an idea that does not connect dots in terms of appearances. It lacks depth. It does not even consider the problems by way of motivating dogs to respond right away when a relationship problem is already underway. And again, this is where I talk about the parenting example, using that as a frame of reference by way of relationship, even the role of the parent based again on the social aspect of the relationship. And so again, I talk about this counterfeit picture that's set in motion by way of responses when, say, for example, the parenting example, once a child has already become selfish and you identify you're dealing with a relationship problem as a parent, it's that moment in the relationship where, and again, just this follows the exact same path, when you decide that you're going to bring your focus onto response in a very superficial way as your criteria or how you're going to base change on. It's be no different than getting a selfish child to say pick up their toys or perform certain good responses for something that they want, such as, again, example, I use the brand new Xbox game. So absolutely, you can get a child to become highly motivated to perform certain responses, but the problem is by way of the relationship itself, by way of, again, connecting dots in terms of what actually defines change beyond just superficial response. Again, I talked about those two core ingredients, control and influence. Now, how you want to tie this into, defining change and even revealing truth by way of the current state of relationship is no different than a parent who's putting a demand on the child to pick up their toys versus, incentivizing response by way of something that the child wants. And so it's like, pick up your toys because you're the parent, like, period. Okay, it's a reasonable demand. And by way of parental influence now being part of that interaction, how that plays into revealing the bad attitude of a child. Typically, a child that is very selfish is all about what's in it for them. And so, again, the problem here, and again, in terms of even looking at the parental parenting style that is in play, in terms of causation, looking at the permissive parenting style, if you look at, again, this goes right into, how dogs connect with us that way, the emotions that are involved in terms of that connection, the absence of, again, those two core ingredients, influence and control, understanding that, they do not align with emotion. Leadership and emotion don't align together. In fact, they follow a different, place on that spectrum. But understanding in terms of, if you look at causation and the parenting style, permissive versus authoritative, you're going to see a very similar dynamic, happening by way of this learning-based ideology, by way of how it sets up a deceptive picture by way of response at that point in the relationship, where the jumping in point, where with trainers who are simply using something a dog wants, such as treats, to elicit a response such as a sit or a down or a come or a stay, and while assuming that those responses represent that perceptions are changing. But again, I talk about those core ingredients that reveal. That's why when you get a dog on a leash and under intentional control and influence, you'll see challenge rise up to the surface. Again, understanding the criteria of that interaction being the dog understanding intent. So I talk about the language of the interactions, how influence is being expressed through those in a way in which the dog understands intent. 2, the criteria to actually discern or reveal the dog's state of mind in the moment, but also tying that into the relationship itself. Now here, getting back to this whole thing with McGuigan using the word, saying about the word no being problematic. Again, this kind of reveals a slippery slope of this ideology, where if it's not based on the truth as to what a standard is, then everything is subjective. It can be whatever you want it to be, but then it goes down the slippery slope of a more kind of radicalized ideology, where you see this with even like the word no can be considered abusive by many in the dog training community, who are all focused on appearances, superficial response. They're not even able to reconcile responses, interpret those responses properly, because again, those two core ingredients are not part of a process to begin with. So they're not reconciling the responses to the relationship itself. And so here, again, interesting saying about the word no, but again, as we move forward here, pay attention to the moment here where Dr. Ian Dunbar actually admits to a problem.
Physically manipulating their dog into position. So it's just to see what your thoughts are about, telling your dog no.
Well, I think that, since you use positive techniques, like toys and treats in training, it must be difficult for you to think, why on earth are people still doing it this way?
Yeah.
Which is not very effective, and it ain't much fun. for the dogs and for the owners. I actually think the reason why still doing it is that people who are using rewards and positive dog-friendly training techniques aren't quite finishing the job.
Okay.
And I see training, it really improved from the 70s, 80s, 90s.
Pay attention to McGuigan's face here, because notice Dr. Ian Dunbar didn't entertain the whole using the word no, foolishness. Okay. He's just moving on here, but now this is starting to take a little turn. And McGuigan, you can tell from his body language, like where's this going?
I think it peaked at the end of the 90s, and it's now coming down. And that ironically, we're using too much food, we're chucking it at the dogs, we're not phasing it out. So what started as using food as a reward, using food as a lure, has now become bribing.
Very, very interesting moment. Okay, so he actually uses that word that so many, okay, in the force-free, even the balanced dog training community, get very offended at. Okay, when you confront this ideology, this idea of what training is, and use that word bribery, all these trainers get very triggered, but they can't explain their way out of it either. Understand that, again, when I talk about connecting dots here in terms of the current state of the relationship, the reason you're going to a dog trainer for help in the first place is because you're experiencing a relationship problem. Okay, understand that this is something that these trainers don't talk about, because to do so actually raises more questions, right? And then you add to that just how many dog owners are experiencing a ongoing relationship problem even after investing time and money into this ideology, even as dogs are looking fantastic in the training environment, moving around for treats, and then discover, well, nothing's actually changed. This happens all the time. Understand, this is like a package deal that goes along with this. So when you raise the whole objection of, hey, hold on a second, this is like you're bribing dogs. Well, that's a reasonable objection, but understand that none of these trainers want to actually respond to that, because it flies in the face of how they're trying to market this as the so-called science of dog training. But here it's an incredible moment, because here you have Dr. Ian Dunbar, all right, bringing this up in this conversation where John McGuigan like wanted to go down a different path with like hoping that, hey, they're using the word no. What you want Ian Dunbar to play into all that? Well, he has his own. He's going forward here, and so this whole kind of like what the heck's going on here? But the question is, again, because here, the whole trying to, and this is the problem with, even Ian Dunbar is using the word lure, certain language or lure. Well, what's the difference between luring and bribery? Think about that. Well, there is no difference if you're not even connecting the dot as to the fact you're dealing with a relationship problem, and those two core ingredients I talk about, influence and control, are absent from that process. Right? Then what's the focus? What's training really about? Well, it's just based on superficial response that does take the path of bribery, because it's missing those two core ingredients. It does not actually align by way of following a path of a intervention, and I talk about that. So you can watch the rest of this conversation, but very interesting moment, in terms of a conversation where you have a trainer actually have a kind of moment of honesty here in a moment. But again, understand that the core issue here is what defines a process. I talk about that. It takes a path of a intervention, motivating dogs to respond at the very beginning, sets in motion this counterfeit picture. It does take the path of bribery. But again, how you think about motivation needs to be different. Understand that the relationship's the motivator. Okay, talk about that at the social level. Dogs, how they connect with us that way. And then once you experience a relationship problem, you need to align yourself with a process that's going to bring in those two core ingredients, influence and control. How that happens is through a intentional interaction-based method that speaks the right language. I talk about right language, dog understanding intent. Okay, and again, by way of changing perception of dogs the right way. Thanks for watching.